Welcome to Cleveland Jewish History, a series of short films dedicated to sharing the history and heritage of Jewish Cleveland. This series was made possible through the generous support of Cleveland Jewish Funerals. Cleveland Jewish Funerals is Cleveland's only Jewish-owned and operated Jewish funeral home, providing Jewish funerals meant to honor the memory of your loved ones. Cleveland Jewish Funerals works with all segments and denominations of Judaism, including the Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, as well as independent and unaffiliated Jews. To learn more about pre-planning, contact Community Liaison David Pearl. Their beautiful facility is conveniently located on Miles Road near Orange and Solon. Contact David Pearl at 216-340-1400 in order to learn how pre-planning can help alleviate the emotional and financial burden experienced by your loved ones during the inherently stressful time of death. Know that pre-planning is an act of chesed, loving kindness towards your loved ones. Making arrangements in advance can also help ensure that your funeral aligns with your faith, traditions, and values. The study and preservation of Cleveland Jewish history has greatly benefited from the assistance of two major institutions, the Jewish Federation of Cleveland and the Western Reserve Historical Society. Since 1976, the Federation has helped to fund the Cleveland Jewish Archives, a repository of the history and collective memory of one of the United States' leading Jewish communities. Over the years, archivists, historians, and hobbyists have all contributed to documenting Cleveland Jewish history. Two books that deserve particular mention are Lloyd P. Gartner's History of the Jews of Cleveland and Sidney Vincent and Judah Rubinstein's Merging Traditions, Jewish Life in Cleveland. A special mention must go out to Jeff Morris. Mr. Morris is the manager of United Jewish Cemeteries of Cleveland. This organization manages two historic Jewish burial grounds in Cleveland, Mayfield Cemetery adjacent to Lakeview, and Cleveland's oldest Jewish burial ground, the WILLET Street Cemetery. While he shies away from referring to himself as a historian, Mr. Morris has made a genuine contribution to local Jewish history. His book, Haymarket to the Heights, is a work of original scholarship that uses primary sources to document the history of Cleveland's myriad Orthodox congregations. This congregational history mirrors the history of Cleveland's Jews at large, from their initial settlement in the Haymarket neighborhood of what is today downtown Cleveland, to the Woodland neighborhood, Kinsman, Mount Pleasant, Glenville, and ultimately the suburbs in the post-war period. Mr. Morris was gracious enough to accompany David Pearl of Cleveland Jewish Funerals to the WILLET Street Cemetery. Stay tuned for bonus footage of this historic burial ground located in Ohio City. It gives us a glimpse of the history of Cleveland's pioneering Jewish community who settled in this area nearly 200 years ago. The founding of Jewish Cleveland began, interestingly enough, in a small town in Bavaria named Unsleben. There on May 5, 1839, 18 immigrants, led by Moses Alspacher, began the perilous trip across the Atlantic to New York City. From there, the immigrants took a trip across the recently built Erie Canal. Passengers would travel up the Hudson River, from New York City to Albany. From there, a series of canals were cut across the landscape from Albany to Syracuse to Rochester and on to Buffalo. The passengers then boarded a lake steamer from Buffalo to Cleveland and docked in Cleveland's harbor sometime late in the summer of 1839. Cleveland at this time was a bustling town of approximately 5,500 souls. It must have retained something of an aura of the frontier. Despite its small size, it was a bustling commercial center, well situated at the crossroads of North American trade. The canal system connected the country's largest city, New York, with Lake Erie, bringing immigrants, goods, and culture from the East Coast. Ohio's goods, in turn, could also find markets back east. Cleveland was also well situated at the head of the Ohio and Erie Canal. It made its way from Cleveland to Akron, down to Newark, Ohio, near the state capital of Columbus, and finally to Portsmouth on the Ohio River. This linked Cleveland to the entire Mississippi River Basin and New Orleans on the Gulf of Mexico. The 18 immigrants who left Unsleben were following another one of their townsmen, Simpson Thorman, who had left Unsleben in 1835 and settled in the Lake Erie port city in 1837. Simpson Thorman traded in furs as far west as the Missouri Territory, and ultimately decided to make his home in Cleveland. He must have seen something in the bustling village and wrote to his fellow Jewish townsmen and encouraged them to leave Unsleben and settle in Cleveland. However, before they left Unsleben, This small band of intrepid Jewish pioneers received an ethical testament from the teacher of the Unsleben Jewish community, Lazarus Cohn. In his letter, Cohn asks for God to bless the Unsleben Jews in their journey. He also exhorts them to stay loyal to their Jewish faith while resisting the seductions of freedom. This document, written in Hebrew and Yiddish, is truly the genesis of Cleveland Jewry. It can be seen on display at the Maltz Museum of Jewish Heritage in Beechwood. Amongst the Jewish pioneers was Simpson Hoffman. Hoffman brought the Torah scroll used by the city's Jews after they founded Cleveland's first Jewish congregation, the Israelitic Society. Hoffman was qualified to serve as the chazan, or cantor, of the Jewish community. He was also a trained shochet, making kosher meat available to the pioneers. Moreover, his son Isaac served as a moel, making circumcisions of Jewish boys possible. The immigrant community settled just east of the Cuyahoga River, in a neighborhood then known as the Haymarket District. This immigrant neighborhood is today situated near the Terminal Tower and the Gateway District. Later, as the community grew, it moved eastward down Orange, Woodland, Scoville, and Central Avenues. Cleveland's Jewish community would generally continue to move eastward for the rest of its history. At this time, the Unsleben Jews could be described as Orthodox. By 1841, Anshe Chesed, today's Fairmount Temple, was established, and the city built the Eagle Street Synagogue, the first Jewish house of worship in Cleveland. The congregation perceived of itself as a German Orthodox congregation. A group of 30 synagogue members, however, split from Anshe Chesed in 1850 and founded another congregation. While it is not entirely clear what led to this split, it seems that the founders of the Temple Tifereth Israel sought to implement more significant reforms to the traditional service. At this time, Tifereth Israel was best described as an Orthodox synagogue with strong reformist tendencies. In 1854, the legendary Sephardi Jewish philanthropist Judah Toro left a transformative gift to the congregation. Toro was a New Orleans merchant who funded the Jewish community in Jerusalem, including the construction of the Mishkanot Sha'ananim neighborhood just outside the Jaffa Gate. He ceded money to nearly every single Jewish congregation in the United States and endowed Jewish hospitals, orphanages, schools, social welfare organizations, and more. He's buried in Newport, Rhode Island, at the cemetery of the Toro Synagogue. It is the country's oldest continuously operating Jewish house of worship, having been built in 1763. It has an important place in the history of religious liberty in the United States. In 1790, before the Bill of Rights was ratified, the congregants of the Toro Synagogue asked George Washington whether the United States would offer religious freedom to its Jewish citizens. In his famous letter to the Hebrew congregation at Newport, Washington assured the Jewish community of their full civil rights, quoting the Jewish prophets by stating, "May the children of the stock of Abraham, who dwell in this land, continue to merit and enjoy the goodwill of the other inhabitants, while everyone shall sit in safety under his own vine and fig tree, and there shall be none to make him afraid." In 1840, the Israelitic Society had a pressing need to establish a Jewish cemetery. An itinerant Jewish peddler named Elchasnador Kahnweiler died in one of the rural districts surrounding Cleveland. The locals, aware that the recently deceased peddler was Jewish, brought his body to Cleveland, where they heard that there was a Jewish community. His body arrived on Thursday, August 6, 1840. Remarkably, the Jewish community was able to secure the purchase of this first burial ground within a day. He was buried before the Sabbath, which also happened to coincide with the Jewish mourning day of Tisha B'Av that year. This inaugural episode of Cleveland Jewish History has been brought to you through the generous support of Cleveland Jewish Funerals. We look forward to creating new content exploring the Jewish history of Cleveland. Stay tuned for new history episodes as well as conversations with local personalities as we explore issues of interest to the Cleveland Jewish community. Cleveland Jewish Funerals is Cleveland's only Jewish-owned and operated funeral home. They are conveniently located on Miles Road near Orange and Solon. Cleveland Jewish Funerals works with all segments of the Jewish community, from Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, and the unaffiliated. To learn more about pre-planning, contact Community Liaison David Pearl at 216-340-1400. Learn how pre-planning can help reduce the stress on your loved ones during the inherently difficult time of death. Pre-planning can also ensure that your memorial aligns with your faith, traditions, and personality. Learn more at clevelandjewishfunerals.com.